this Kristen Jacobson.
Do you ever feel like you have to do everything yourself? Like asking for help isn't even really an option? If that sounds familiar, you might think you're just independent. But what if I told you this is actually a response to past letdowns? Let's talk about why hyper-independence happens and what you can do about it. Hyper-independence can feel like a strength, and it's often revered in our society. You handle everything, you don't need help, you push through no matter what. People really admire your work ethic, your ability to stay in control, and how strong you are. But hyper-independence isn't really about being strong, it's about staying safe. And for many people, this extreme self-reliance didn't come from nowhere. It was learned. So maybe you grew up in a home where asking for help led to disappointment, or maybe you opened up to someone only to feel dismissed or let down. Over time, your brain created a core belief that relying on others is too risky, so I have to do it all myself. And at first, this mindset may have helped you survive. But now it might be the very thing that's actually keeping you overwhelmed, anxious, and disconnected from the people around you. So why does hyper-independence happen? If you find it hard to rely on others, there's a reason for it. It doesn't just show up randomly. It usually comes from experiences that taught you that trusting people wasn't an option. So the first factor can be childhood emotional neglect. So if your caregivers were emotionally unavailable or emotionally immature or maybe dismissive, then you may have learned that your needs weren't important. Or maybe when you expressed emotions, you were met with a sense of indifference. Or when you asked for help, maybe you felt dismissed. So over time, you eventually stop asking and seeking out this support. The second factor is repeated disappointment. So even outside of childhood, hyper-independence can develop when you've been let down too many times. If trusting people has led to betrayal, rejection, disappointment, or abandonment, your brain starts treating connection as a risk. The third factor is trauma and survival mode. So people who have experienced trauma, whether that's from childhood, relationships, or life circumstances, they often develop hyper-independence as a survival strategy. If no one was there to protect you, then you had to learn how to protect yourself. But the problem is once the actual danger is gone, the survival mode sticks with you. And then the fourth factor is feeling unworthy and feeling like you have to prove your worth. So for many people, hyper-independence isn't just about not trusting others, it's about not trusting themselves to be enough. And if you grew up believing that your worth was tied to what you do rather than who you are, then you might feel like you have to constantly prove yourself. So you might take on too much because slowing down feels like a failure, or you might struggle to accept compliments or recognition because you feel like you should be doing more. No matter how much you accomplish, it just never feels like enough. And this leads to a cycle where you work harder and harder, but you actually devalue your own contributions. So you believe you have to earn your place, whether that's at work, in relationships, or even in your own mind. And accepting help feels uncomfortable because deep down, you may feel like you haven't earned it. So this belief system can keep you in a constant state of stress, anxiety, and burnout, making it even harder to break the cycle of extreme self-reliance. So let's look at the science behind it. Hyper-independence isn't just a habit, it's wired into your brain. When you experience some sort of emotional neglect, betrayal, or trauma, your amygdala, the brain's fear center, becomes more sensitive. And so it starts reacting to emotional risks the same way it would react to physical danger. So asking for help or relying on someone or being vulnerable can trigger that same fight or flight response as a real threat. And instead of viewing support as something positive, your brain starts seeing it as something dangerous. And so this is why even when you logically know that it's okay to lean on others, it still feels deeply uncomfortable. So at first glance, hyper-independence and anxiety might seem like opposites, right? Hyper-independent people seem to be in control, while anxious people often seem overwhelmed and fear being out of control. But in reality, they're deeply connected. So carrying everything alone equals constant stress. When you refuse help, every responsibility, every problem, and every decision falls on you, which really creates chronic stress. And this can lead to exhaustion, tension, and racing thoughts, really classic symptoms of anxiety. The fear of being let down equals avoidance. So many hyper-independent people struggle with social anxiety, even if they don't realize it. When you believe that relying on others is dangerous, you may avoid deep connections, keep relationships more surface level, or pull away when people get too close. And then there's perfectionism and over-control. So if you've learned that depending on others isn't an option, you might try to control everything yourself. And this can really lead to perfectionism, overworking, and burnout, all of which fuel anxiety. So how do you start accepting help or asking for help without it feeling unsafe? If hyperindependence has been your default for years, then the idea of letting in can feel impossible. But learning to accept support doesn't mean losing control. It actually means giving yourself permission to feel safe in connection. So for starters, we need to recognize that it's a learned response. Hyperindependence isn't just your personality. It's something you learned to keep yourself safe. And just like it was learned, it can also be unlearned. You also want to start small. So if accepting help feels overwhelming, just start with tiny steps. Let a friend offer you support, let a coworker handle a task that maybe you'd normally take on yourself, and then notice how it feels. You also want to challenge the fear of being let down. So not everyone will disappoint you. Some people will show up. So instead of assuming the worst, start paying attention to the people who prove they are reliable, because these are your people. There will be people who consistently disappoint you, and in that case, yes, don't get your hopes up because you're setting yourself up for disappointment. But we can't make that generalization to all people because there are people out there who will follow through. You also want to build safe relationships. So your brain can rewire itself. And when you experience safe, consistent support, your nervous system starts learning that it's okay to depend on others. So therapy, deep friendships, or even maybe some online support communities can help with this. And you want to remind yourself that strength isn't isolation. So true strength isn't doing everything alone. It's actually knowing when to stand on your own and when to let others help. So to wrap up, hyperindependence helped you survive, right? It protected you when you needed it most, but now it might actually be working against you and keeping you stuck. We as humans are wired for connection. And just because support wasn't available to you in the past doesn't mean you don't need it now. And learning to trust again is really hard, but it is possible. And when you do, you might realize that real strength isn't about handling everything alone. It's actually about knowing you don't have to. I hope this video was helpful. I tend to work a lot with hyper-independent clients, so I would love to hear from you sort of how hyper-independence shows up in your life. And feel free to leave a comment or ask a question, and be sure to like and subscribe so you know when my new videos are released. I hope you all have a great week. I'll see you next time.